4 cases. For moments when the world stopped and watched. All of them are real. All of them are documented. All of them are still unfinished in the ways that matter most. There are crimes that happen and are prosecuted and are closed and are filed away. And then there are crimes that change something. Not just in a courtroom. Not just in a statute book. But in the way a culture sees itself. In the questions a society is forced to ask about its own systems, its own assumptions, its own capacity for violence and deception, and the kind of evil that wears an ordinary face and lives in ordinary places. The 4 cases in this documentary are that second kind. One involves a man so famous that his trial became a referendum on race, justice, and celebrity in America, and exposed fractures in the legal system that had been visible for decades to some and invisible to others. One involves a man who lived as a respected community figure, a church president, a compliance officer, while binding, torturing, and killing 10 people across 3 decades, taunting police with letters they could not trace. One involves a man who convinced over 900 people to follow him to a remote jungle compound and then ordered them to die. And one involves a child whose disappearance from a holiday apartment in Portugal in 2007 became the most intensively publicized missing child case in history, and whose fate, as of this production, remains officially unresolved. 4 cases. 100 minutes. No simple conclusions. Because the cases that shake the world rarely offer simple conclusions. 4 cases. 100 minutes. No simple conclusions. June 12, 1994. Brentwood, Los Angeles. 2 people were murdered. What followed became the most watched trial in American history. On the night of June 12, 1994, a dog began barking. It was a white Akita, and it belonged to Nicole Brown Simpson, the 35-year-old ex-wife of O.J. Simpson, one of the most celebrated athletes in American history, a Hall of Fame running back whose persona had long since transcended football to become something larger, a film presence, a commercial spokesman, a man so thoroughly woven into American popular culture that his smile was, to tens of millions of people, simply familiar. The dog barked and barked and barked. A neighbor followed the dog back to 875 South Bundy Drive, Nicole's Brentwood condominium. What she found there ended the night of June 12 and began something else entirely. 875 South Bundy Drive, Brentwood. June 12, 1994. What a neighbor found there changed American history. Nicole Brown Simpson was dead. Stabbed multiple times, her body near the front gate of her home. Beside her was Ronald Lyle Goldman, 25 years old, a friend of Nicole's, a waiter at a restaurant she frequented. He had come to return a pair of sunglasses her mother had left at the restaurant. He had, investigators would conclude, arrived during the attack. He too was dead. Stabbed more than 30 times. The crime scene produced what Los Angeles Police Department investigators described as an abundance of physical evidence. Blood. Shoe prints from a rare Bruno Magli shoe in size 12. A dark knit cap. A leather glove, a left glove, matching the type sold exclusively at Bloomingdale's in New York. The evidence pointed, quickly and specifically, toward one person. Orenthal James Simpson. Nicole's ex-husband. Father of their 2 young children. The man who had, over the course of their marriage, been the subject of multiple domestic violence calls to police, calls that had, in the way that domestic violence calls involving famous men too often were handled in that era, resulted in minimal formal consequence. Multiple domestic violence calls during their marriage. Minimal formal consequence each time. On June 13, 1994, while O.J. Simpson was in Chicago, where he had flown the previous evening for a prearranged golf event, homicide detectives arrived at his Rockingham Avenue estate in Brentwood to notify him of Nicole's death. In the process of conducting a welfare check of the property, they discovered something. A trail of blood drops leading from the driveway toward the front door of the house. On one side of the driveway, a bloody leather glove, a right glove, matching the left glove found at the Bundy crime scene. A cut on O.J. Simpson's left hand that he gave multiple inconsistent explanations for. Simpson was brought in for questioning. He was not arrested immediately. He retained lawyers. On June 17, 1994, a warrant was issued for O.J. Simpson's arrest on 2 counts of murder. He was supposed to turn himself in. He did not. Instead, he got into the back of a white Ford Bronco driven by his friend Al Cowlings and led police on a slow-speed chase along the freeways of Los Angeles that was broadcast live on every major American television network. 95 million people watched. 95 million people watched the Bronco chase live on television. That number tells you everything about what this case was. In the back of the Bronco, O.J. Simpson held a gun to his own head. A note had been found at his friend's house, a note that read, in part, as a goodbye. He was talked down. He was arrested when the vehicle returned to his Rockingham estate. And the trial that followed, People of the State of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, became something that the word trial is insufficient to describe. It was a cultural event. It was a national referendum. It was, for many Americans watching, a moment in which every question they had ever had about the justice system, about race and power and celebrity and the difference between what the law says and what actually happens, all of those questions arrived simultaneously, looking for an answer. The trial began on January 24, 1995. The prosecution's case was built on the physical evidence from the crime scene, the blood, the shoe prints, the gloves, the DNA analysis, and on the documented history of domestic violence. The DNA evidence was, by the standards of 1994, overwhelming. Blood found at the Bundy crime scene matched O.J. Simpson. Blood found in his Bronco and at his Rockingham estate contained DNA consistent with both victims. The statistical probability of the matches occurring by chance was, according to prosecution experts, in the billions or trillions to 1. The defense team, a group that would come to be called the Dream Team, comprising Johnny Cochran, F. Lee Bailey, Barry Scheck, Peter Neufeld, and others, pursued a strategy that was simultaneously technical and cultural. Technically, they attacked the collection, handling, and storage of the physical evidence. They argued, with specific documentation, that the LAPD's evidence collection procedures had been contaminated, careless, and in some instances deliberately compromised. Their argument was not that the DNA was wrong, it was that the DNA had been mishandled in ways that made it unreliable. Culturally, they made Detective Mark Furman one of the lead investigators at the Bundy crime scene, the detective who had discovered the right glove at Rockingham, the centerpiece of an argument about institutional racism within the LAPD. The defense strategy: attack the evidence collection. And put the LAPD's history of racism on trial alongside O.J. Simpson. Furman, under oath, denied ever having used a racial slur. Audio recordings were subsequently introduced into evidence in which Furman could be heard using that slur more than 40 times in conversations with a screenwriter recorded years before the trial. He invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination when asked whether he had planted evidence in the case. The impact on the jury and on the watching public was seismic. There was also the glove. A moment in the trial that, nearly 30 years later, remains perhaps the most discussed single event in American courtroom history. Johnnie Cochran had been building toward a demonstrative moment, a physical illustration of the defense's argument that the evidence had been mishandled and that Simpson had been framed. The prosecution, perhaps misjudging the risk, agreed to allow Simpson to try on the gloves recovered from the crime scene and from Rockingham, gloves that had been subjected to moisture, chemical testing, and months of evidence storage. Simpson put them on. They appeared not to fit. Cochran delivered what became the most quoted line of the entire trial. "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." The glove demonstration. "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." The trial changed in that moment. Prosecution experts argued that leather gloves shrink when wet, and that Simpson was visibly struggling to pull them on, that the fit was being performed rather than experienced. The jury had already seen photographs of Simpson wearing gloves matching the crime scene pair at a football game. But the moment had happened. On camera. In front of a watching nation. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. On October 3, 1995, after 9 months of testimony, the verdict was read. Not guilty. On both counts. The reaction was immediate, national, and divided along lines that shocked many white Americans and surprised almost no black Americans who were paying attention. Black Americans surveyed in polling conducted immediately after the verdict expressed, by significant majorities, a belief that Simpson had received the kind of fair trial that black Americans historically had not received in this country, that for once, the system had bent toward rather than against someone who looked like him. White Americans expressed, by similar majorities, shock and dismay. The gap between those two reactions, the specific, precise gap between them, was itself one of the most important things the O.J. Simpson trial produced. Not the verdict. The gap. The verdict said, not guilty. The gap said, we have been living in different Americas, and this trial has made it temporarily impossible to pretend otherwise. Not guilty on both counts. October 3, 1995. The verdict split the country. The split was already there. In 1997, a civil jury found O.J. Simpson liable for the deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman, awarding damages of $33.5 million to the Goldman and Brown families. He never paid it in full. In 2007, Simpson was arrested in Las Vegas following an armed robbery at a hotel room. He was convicted in 2008 on 12 counts including armed robbery and kidnapping and sentenced to 33 years in prison. He served 9 years before being granted parole in 2017. O.J. Simpson died on April 10, 2024, of prostate cancer. He was 76 years old. Nicole Brown Simpson was 35 years old when she died. Ronald Goldman was 25 years old when he died. Their families have never received the criminal accountability that the civil verdict acknowledged. Case 1 of 4. O.J. Simpson. The trial of the century. That was Case 1. Case 2 is one of the most chilling cold cases in FBI history, a serial killer who taunted police for 3 decades while living as a church president, a Boy Scout leader, and a compliance officer in a quiet Kansas town. Subscribe now and hit the bell so you're notified the moment our next video drops. Stay with us through all 4 cases. There is a particular category of criminal that law enforcement professionals find the most difficult to find, prosecute, and even after arrest, fully comprehend. Not the impulsive killer. Not the crime of passion. Not the desperate act of someone whose behavior had been escalating visibly in ways that, in retrospect, should have been caught. The patient ones. The ones who live entire lives on the surface, functional, social, employed, respected, visible, while conducting, in the spaces between the ordinary moments, something that no one around them could begin to imagine. Dennis Rader was the most patient killer of the 20th century. Dennis Rader. Church president. Boy Scout leader. Compliance officer. Married father of 2. BTK. Dennis Lynn Rader was born on March 9, 1945, in Pittsburgh, Kansas. He was one of 4 brothers in a working-class family. He joined the Air Force, served, and was honorably discharged. He attended Wichita State University. He married in 1971. He and Paula Rader had 2 children. They attended Christ Lutheran Church in Park City, a Wichita suburb. Dennis Rader eventually became president of the church's Congregation Council. He was a Boy Scout troop leader. He worked for ADT Security, a company that installed and monitored home alarm systems, and later became a compliance officer for Park City, inspecting homes for municipal code violations. He mowed his lawn. He went to church. He attended his children's school events. He killed 10 people across 17 years. And then he taunted the police about it for decades. 10 people. 17 years. He taunted police. They could not find him. The first murders attributed to BTK occurred on January 15, 1974. Joseph Otero, 38 years old. His wife Julie, 34. Their son Joseph, 9 years old. Their daughter Josephine, 11 years old. 4 members of one family, killed in their home in Wichita in the morning hours while 2 other Otero children were at school. Dennis Rader had selected the family by surveillance. He had watched them. He had chosen them. He entered their home and killed all 4 of them before the school bus had brought the other children home. For months, Wichita police investigated without a suspect. Then, in October 1974, an anonymous caller directed police to a letter hidden inside an engineering book at the Wichita Public Library. The letter described the Otero killings in specific detail that had not been released publicly, detail that only the killer could know. It was signed with a term the author explained in the letter itself. BTK. Bind them. Torture them. Kill them. The killer had given himself a name. October 1974. A letter in the library. BTK had given himself a name. He wanted to be known. The murders continued. Catherine Bright, 21 years old, was killed in April 1974, before the library letter was found. Her brother Kevin survived the attack and was the only person to ever encounter BTK and live to describe him. Shirley Vian Relford, 26 years old, killed in March 1977. Her 3 young children were bound and locked in a closet during the attack. They survived. Nancy Fox, 25 years old, killed in December 1977. Maureen Hedge, 53 years old, killed in April 1985. Vicki Wegerle, 28 years old, killed in September 1986. Dolores Davis, 62 years old, killed in January 1991. Between each murder, between each cluster of letters and packages sent to police and media, Dennis Rader lived his life. He went to work. He went to church. He attended meetings. He interacted with neighbors, colleagues, city officials. He was not hiding in the shadows. He was in the light. Between each murder, he went to church. He went to work. He attended school events for his children. The letters Rader sent over the years are among the most studied documents in FBI behavioral science history. They were taunting. They were self-aggrandizing. They reflected a man who needed recognition, who had committed these acts, in part, for an audience he was actively trying to cultivate. An audience that consisted, specifically, of the investigators who were trying to find him and the public that was following the case. In one letter, he asked investigators directly whether the term BTK Strangler would get media coverage. He was, in a sense, managing his own brand before that concept existed in the terms we now use. In 1978, he wrote to a local television station, "How many people do I have to kill before I get my name in the paper or some national attention?" He was not hiding. He was performing. The BTK murders went cold. Rader's final confirmed murder occurred in January 1991. Then, silence. For 13 years, there were no new BTK communications. The case remained technically open but effectively stalled. Investigators had suspects over the years, but none that the evidence supported charging. Rader had simply stopped communicating. The assumption, by some investigators, by media, by the public, was that BTK had died. Or had been imprisoned for an unrelated crime. Or had simply stopped. He had not stopped. He had been living in Park City, Kansas, serving as president of his church congregation, attending city compliance meetings, mowing his lawn. Waiting. In 2004, the 30th anniversary of the Otero murders prompted renewed media coverage. Local newspapers and television stations ran retrospectives on the BTK case. And Dennis Rader began communicating again. Over the next year, he sent 18 communications to police and media, letters, packages, a postcard. Each one confirmed that BTK was still alive. Still engaged. Still performing for an audience that had, in his perception, moved on. 2004, renewed media coverage of the BTK case. Rader began communicating again. 18 messages in 1 year. The communication that ended Dennis Rader's freedom was sent in February 2005. He said a floppy disk, a storage medium that was already largely obsolete by 2005, inside a cereal box left in a park. Investigators had previously been cautious. In a prior communication, Rader had asked whether a floppy disk could be traced back to him. Police had responded through a newspaper classified ad, falsely, that no, it could not. He believed them. Forensic examiners at the FBI loaded the disk. It contained a Microsoft Word document. The document's metadata, the invisible digital fingerprint embedded in every office document, showed that it had been last modified by a user named Dennis. And that it had been last saved at Christ Lutheran Church. Dennis Rader was arrested on February 25, 2005, during a traffic stop near his home in Park City. He was taken from his vehicle without resistance. He was 60 years old. He had been president of his church congregation council for 4 years. At his preliminary hearing in June 2005, Rader provided what prosecutors later described as one of the most extraordinary courtroom confessions in the history of American criminal justice, a methodical, almost clinical, self-narrated account of each of his 10 murders, delivered in the dry, technical language of a man describing a compliance inspection. He pleaded guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms, a minimum of 175 years before parole eligibility. He will die in prison. His wife Paula divorced him immediately after his arrest. Their children have spoken publicly about the trauma of discovering that the father they knew was not the person they thought they knew, and about the impossible task of reconciling those two realities. The BTK case produced significant advances in how law enforcement agencies handle and respond to communications from active serial offenders, specifically, in how to extract metadata from digital communications without alerting the sender. It also produced a question that investigators, criminologists, and the families of Raiders victims have spent years trying to answer. How does a man who kills 10 people across 17 years, who maintains contact with investigators, who attends church, who raises children, who is known to his neighbors, how does he not show any sign of what he is? The uncomfortable answer is one that the BTK case demonstrates with stark clarity. He does show signs. The signs are simply not what we expect evil to look like. Dennis Rader lived as a respected member of his community for 30 years while killing 10 people. And the way he was finally caught, a floppy disk and a Word document, is a detail that stays with you. We're at the halfway point. Case 3 is one of the darkest days in modern history. Over 900 people died in a single night, and most of them chose to. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a case. And share this video with someone who needs to hear these stories. November 18, 1978. Jonestown, Guyana. 918 people died in a single night. Most of them willingly. Understanding how requires understanding what happened before. Before the night of November 18, 1978, there was a dream. Not a corrupt dream in its inception. Not a dream built on deception from the very first moment. Whatever Jim Jones was, whatever he became, the movement that produced Jonestown began in something that, in the context of mid-20th century America, contained genuine moral seriousness. Before Jonestown, a movement that began in something real. Understanding what it became requires understanding what it was. James Warren Jones was born on May 13, 1931, in Crete, Indiana. He was ordained as a minister in the early 1950s and founded what would become the People's Temple Christian Church in Indianapolis. From its beginning, the People's Temple had a specific and radical identity. It was racially integrated in an era when that was not a common or comfortable position in mainstream American Christianity. Jones preached a gospel that combined evangelical Christianity with explicit social justice commitments to racial equality, to care for the poor and elderly, to community solidarity. These were not fake commitments, at least not initially. The People's Temple ran soup kitchens and drug rehabilitation programs. It provided housing and legal assistance. It attracted followers who genuinely believed they were building something meaningful, something the mainstream world had failed to build. The congregation was predominantly black, and it was devoted to a charismatic white pastor who spoke, consistently and passionately, about equality and justice. Jim Jones was also, from much earlier than his public career suggested, a man with serious psychological instability, an escalating addiction to prescription drugs, a messiah complex that grew more grandiose each year, and a willingness to use manipulation, intimidation, and coercion as tools of leadership. The People's Temple moved to California in the mid-1960s, first to Northern California, then to San Francisco and Los Angeles, where it grew to thousands of members. At its peak, the People's Temple had a congregation estimated at between 3,000 and 20,000 people and had accumulated significant political influence in San Francisco's democratic politics. Politicians sought the church's endorsement.
Journalists who raised early concerns about practices inside the temple found themselves facing defamation suits and organized campaigns to discredit them.
The church was protected by its political capital, by its reputation, by the genuine good that it was simultaneously doing in communities that were grateful for it. Political influence. Community reputation. Defamation suits against journalists who raised concerns. The temple was protected. Inside the temple, the story was different.
Former members who eventually came forward, and doing so required significant courage, given the temple's documented pattern of surveillance, harassment, and retaliation against defectors, described practices that had, over years, crossed from demanding into controlling into terrifying.
Members were required to surrender financial assets to the church. Personal property, savings, and eventually income were turned over to temple leadership. Members lived communally, with limited access to outside contact. Discipline within the temple included public humiliation sessions, called catharsis, in which members were brought before the congregation and verbally attacked for perceived failures or disloyalty. Physical punishment was documented. Jones staged fake faith healing demonstrations, using planted audience members to claim miracles that had been arranged in advance. He used the demonstrations to reinforce his persona as a divine figure with special powers.
He increasingly referred to himself as God. And his followers, many of whom had come to the temple seeking genuine community, genuine purpose, genuine belonging in a society that had failed them, were now so embedded in the structure of the organization that leaving had become practically, emotionally, and in some cases physically, nearly impossible.
Financial surrender. Communal living. Public humiliation sessions. Jones calling himself God.
Exit made nearly impossible. In 1974, the People's Temple leased land from the government of Guyana, a small nation on the northeast coast of South America, and began constructing a remote agricultural settlement in the jungle. The stated purpose was an idealistic one, a socialist agricultural community where members could live free of American racism and capitalism, building a new society from the ground up. The actual function of the Jonestown agricultural mission was, investigators and survivors concluded, more specific. It was a place where the most committed and most controlled members of the temple could be relocated beyond the reach of American law, American journalists, American courts, and the family members of temple members who were raising increasingly urgent questions about what was happening to their loved ones.
The jungle of Guyana. Beyond American law. Beyond journalists. Beyond family members asking questions. By 1977 and 1978, several hundred, then more than 900 temple members had relocated to Jonestown. They were not, for the most part, prisoners in the legal sense. But the conditions of life at Jonestown, the remote location, the controlled communications, the armed guards at the perimeter, the confiscation of passports, the psychological manipulation of daily life, created an environment in which leaving required resources and resolve that most residents did not have access to. Jones conducted rehearsals for what he called White Night, a collective death he described as a revolutionary act, a protest suicide, a final statement of defiance against the capitalist system that had persecuted his movement. He held these rehearsals. Residents were given liquid to drink, told it was poisoned, and instructed to die with dignity. Then they were told it was a test. That they had passed. He conducted multiple such rehearsals. He was conditioning. He rehearsed it. He called it revolutionary suicide. He did it multiple times before the night it was real. In November 1978,
Congressman Leo Ryan of California, responding to constituent concern from the relatives of Jonestown residents, traveled to Jonestown with a delegation of journalists and concerned family members to conduct a welfare assessment.
Ryan was allowed into Jonestown. He met with residents.
He conducted meetings with Jones.
On the surface, the visit proceeded. But some residents had passed notes to members of Ryan's delegation requesting rescue, expressing a desire to leave. On November 18, 1978, Ryan's delegation prepared to depart Jonestown, accompanied by approximately 15 temple members who had chosen to leave. At the Port Kaituma airstrip, gunmen sent by Jones attacked the departing group. Congressman Leo Ryan was shot and killed. He was the first sitting United States congressman to be killed in the line of duty. 3 journalists accompanying him were also killed. 1 temple member defector was killed. Others were wounded. November 18, 1978. A congressman. 3 journalists. Shot at an airstrip in the jungle. Back at Jonestown, Jim Jones called his congregation together. He told them that the killings at the airstrip meant that the end had come. That the American government would now descend on Jonestown and destroy everything they had built. That the only revolutionary response, the only dignified response, was to die together. Vat after vat of grape-flavored drink was laced with cyanide, Valium, and other drugs. Some members drank willingly, believing what Jones told them, that this was the ultimate revolutionary act. Others did not go willingly. The accounts of survivors, physical evidence from the scene, and the autopsies of the dead indicate that some residents, particularly children, who had no choice in any meaningful sense, were injected with the poison by medical personnel. Some adults show signs of having been held down. The process took approximately 5 minutes per person. It took more than 2 hours for everyone to die. 918 people died at Jonestown on November 18, 1978. 304 of them were children. 918 people. November 18, 1978. 304 of them were children. Jim Jones was found dead at Jonestown with a gunshot wound to the head. Whether he shot himself or was shot by a loyalist at his request has not been definitively determined. The phrase "drinking the Kool-Aid," used in contemporary culture as casual shorthand for following something blindly, derives from Jonestown. The casual use of that phrase is worth examining in the light of what it actually refers to. 918 people died in the jungle. Most of them were Black Americans who had followed a man who told them he would lead them to equality and justice, and who led them, instead, to a clearing in the jungle in South America where they were told to die. The phrase they left behind deserves more than a casual usage. 918 people died. 304 were children. The phrase "drinking the Kool-Aid" comes from this. It deserves more than casual usage. The Jonestown massacre exposed failures at multiple levels in government oversight of religious organizations that abuse members, in the systems that should have responded to the concerns of families who had been trying to reach their loved ones for years, and in the broader cultural willingness to extend credibility to charismatic leaders past the point where that credibility is warranted. The word cult is imprecise and often unhelpful. What Jonestown demonstrates is something more specific. What happens when the mechanisms of exit, financial, psychological, geographic, social, are systematically removed from an organization that is simultaneously being protected by its public reputation from meaningful external scrutiny? What happens is Jonestown. Case 3 of 4. Jim Jones. Jonestown. November 18, 1978. 918 people. 304 of them children. And the world didn't know until it was over. We have one case left, and it is one that is still open, still active, still debated over a decade and a half later. Subscribe to Sinister Secrets Uncovered too so you never miss what we cover next. Investigative productions like this take significant time and resources. Your support makes them possible. May 3, 2007. Praia de Luz, Portugal. A 3-year-old girl was put to bed by her parents. She was never seen again. The disappearance of Madeleine Beth McCann is the most intensively publicized missing child case in history. That is not hyperbole. It is a documentable fact. The case generated more media coverage in more languages, across more countries, over a longer sustained period than any missing child case that had preceded it. And as of this production, more than 17 years after the night of May 3, 2007, Madeleine McCann has not been found. Her fate has not been officially determined. No one has been charged in connection with her disappearance. 17 years. More coverage than any missing child case in history. No charge. No confirmed fate. The McCanns, Kate, a general practitioner, and Jerry, a cardiologist, had traveled to the Algarve resort town of Praia de Luz in southern Portugal for a family holiday in May 2007 with their 3 children, Madeleine, 3 years old, and twins Sean and Amelie, 2 years old. They were staying at the Ocean Club Resort Complex in apartment 5A. On the evenings of their holiday, the McCann group, a party of 9 adults, all doctors, with their children, had been eating together at the Tapas restaurant on the resort grounds, approximately 50 meters from the apartment block where the children were sleeping. The adults checked on the children at intervals during the evenings. On the evening of May 3, 2007, the children were put to bed at approximately 7:30 p.m. At approximately 10 p.m., Kate McCann went to check on the children. Madeleine was gone. 10 p.m., May 3, 2007. Kate McCann checked on her children. Madeleine was not in her bed. The bedroom window and shutter were open. There were no signs of a violent struggle. The twins were asleep and unharmed in their cots. Portuguese police were called. A massive search operation began. What followed in the weeks and months after Madeleine's disappearance was, in the specific and important sense, a case study in how intense media pressure can complicate a criminal investigation rather than assist it. Every detail of the investigation, witness accounts, police theories, forensic findings, was leaked to, or obtained by, the international press and broadcast before investigators had been able to evaluate their significance. The Portuguese investigation, led by the Polícia Judiciária, initially treated the case as a kidnapping. Then, following the interpretation of forensic evidence from the apartment, the investigation shifted. Kate and Jerry McCann were made arguidos, formal suspects under Portuguese law in September 2007. The forensic evidence that had shifted the investigation's focus was a reading from a British cadaver detection dog, Eddie, trained to alert to the scent of human decomposition, that alerted to several areas of apartment 5A and to the McCann's hire car, which they had not rented until 3 weeks after Madeleine's disappearance. September 2007. Kate and Jerry McCann named arguidos, formal suspects. The investigation had shifted direction. The McCann arguido status was withdrawn in July 2008, when the Portuguese Attorney General officially shelved the investigation and concluded that there was insufficient evidence to charge anyone. The summary released at the time stated specifically that there was no evidence that the McCanns had been involved in Madeleine's disappearance. The investigation was shelved. The McCanns had maintained their innocence throughout and continued to do so. They established the Find Madeleine Fund and continued actively to pursue leads and press for investigation in the years that followed. British police, the Metropolitan Police, opened their own review in 2011, codenamed Operation Grange, at the request of the then Prime Minister David Cameron. Operation Grange reviewed more than 40,000 documents, conducted interviews across multiple countries, and followed up more than 8,000 potential leads. It identified a prime suspect in June 2020. June 2020. A prime suspect identified. 13 years after Madeleine disappeared. Christian Bruckner, a German national born in 1976, was identified publicly as the primary suspect by German investigators, with the investigation coordinated between German authorities and the Metropolitan Police. Bruckner had a documented criminal history that included convictions for sexual offenses against children, a conviction for rape committed in the Algarve in 2005, and a history of operating in the Praia de Luz area around the time of Madeleine's disappearance. He had lived in the Algarve region for significant periods and had been present in the area on May 3, 2007. German investigators stated publicly that they believed Madeleine was dead and that Bruckner was responsible. Christian Bruckner. Prior convictions for sexual offenses against children. Present in Praia de Luz on May 3, 2007. As of this production, Christian Bruckner has not been charged in connection with Madeleine McCann's disappearance. He has been charged and convicted in Germany for other sexual offenses, a conviction in 2019 for the 2005 Algarve rape, and separate charges in Germany for additional offenses. He has been imprisoned. German prosecutors have not formally charged him with Madeleine McCann's disappearance or death. The evidentiary threshold for a formal murder charge has, as of this production, not been reached. His lawyers have denied his involvement in Madeleine McCann's disappearance. Not charged in connection with Madeleine McCann. As of this production, no charge has been filed. The case was reopened in Portugal in 2022. In 2023, Portuguese authorities searched a reservoir in the Algarve, a raid reservoir, following new information provided to German prosecutors. The search was conducted over several days. Nothing conclusive was found. Operation Grange has continued to receive funding from the UK Home Office. As of this production, the investigation remains active. Madeleine McCann was 3 years old when she disappeared. If she were alive today, she would be 21 years old. Her parents have spent 17 years looking for her, advocating for her, refusing to close the file on a case that the systems responsible for investigating it have not closed. The case has attracted every kind of coverage: sympathetic, critical, conspiratorial, serious, salacious. It has attracted theories in the thousands. It has attracted accusations against the McCanns that Portuguese and British courts have consistently found without basis. It has not produced what the McCanns have been asking for since the night of May 3, 2007. A confirmed answer. A confirmed location. A charged perpetrator. A chance to bring their daughter home. Madeleine McCann would be 21 years old today. She has not been found. The case is still open. The McCann case is included in this compilation not because it is resolved, it is not, but because it represents something that the other 3 cases in this documentary also represent, in their different ways. The distance between what the world's attention can do and what justice actually requires. Madeleine McCann had the world's attention. Hundreds of millions of people knew her name within weeks of her disappearance. Governments committed resources. Police forces from multiple nations coordinated.
A fund raised millions of pounds. And she has not been found.
The gap between the attention and the outcome is one of the most important things this case teaches. Attention is not investigation. Media coverage is not accountability. The most watched cases are not always the most solved. Case 4 of 4. Madeleine McCann. Disappeared May 3, 2007. Still missing. 4 cases. 1 verdict that split a nation. A serial killer caught by a floppy disk. 918 people who died in a jungle. And a little girl who still hasn't been found.
If this compilation gave you something understanding, the sense that these cases deserve more than a headline, share it right now.
Tell someone about it. And leave us a comment. Which of these 4 cases has stayed with you the most? We read every comment. Subscribe so you're here for part 2. The O.J. Simpson trial was not about one man's guilt or innocence.
It was about what a country saw when it looked at the same evidence and how differently it saw it, based on what that evidence meant against the backdrop of its own experience. The BTK case was not about a monster who looked like a monster. It was about a man who looked like a church president, who was a church president, who killed 10 people, who sent letters taunting police, who mowed his lawn and attended his children's school events and was caught by a Word document's metadata 30 years after his first murder.
Jonestown was not about 918 people making a uniformly free choice. It was about what happens when the mechanisms of exit are systematically removed from a community financially, geographically, psychologically, until the word choice no longer means what it usually means. And the disappearance of Madeleine McCann is not about one family's private grief. It is about the gap between the world's attention and the world's capacity to translate that attention into accountability. About the distance between watching and knowing. Between caring and finding. 4 cases. For different architectures of harm. For different ways the world was forced to look at itself and ask questions it would have preferred not to ask. The questions are still there. Which is, perhaps, the most important thing all 4 of them have in common. Part 1 of 4. Next case, coming soon. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Subscribe for new sinister secrets uncovered, 2 investigations every week. Share this compilation, these cases deserve to be remembered. Tell us in the comments, which of the 4 cases left the deepest impression? Part 2 is coming. Subscribe so you're notified.